Hey everyone, I'm Brendan from Commonwear, and I'm here to talk to you about our new consensus algorithm that we came up with called Minimmit. And the alternative name for the talk is Consensus for Everyone, because that's me over there on the right. I'm just an engineer. I'm not a researcher. So as we were looking for a really fast consensus algorithm to power blockchains of the future, I was reading all these papers, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to code this. I'm going to have to write tests for all these different code paths. Is there something simpler that we could do? It seems like there's a lot of unnecessary messages that are being sent around and so forth. So we set out to write something that was as simple as possible, and I hope I'll go into a little background on consensus in general, and that should basically make the talk more accessible to people who aren't consensus people. Some of the explanations are going to kind of be vibe codey or like vibe explainy. So some of the explanations might not be literally correct, but they should at least be good signposts to help you understand. So we'll go over a quick definition of consensus really quickly. Consensus, I wrote, is every correct replica eventually decides on the same blocks. So replicas you can think of as validators, nodes, that kind of thing. And it's basically saying if you're running the software as intended, you're going to agree on the same blocks as everybody else. There's two other terms you need to know because they'll come back. That's safety, which is the same blocks part, so everybody agrees on the same blocks, and liveness, which is that everybody eventually decides. Talking a little bit about fault tolerance, just again going over some quick definitions. There's correct replicas, which follow the protocol running the software as intended. There's faulty replicas, which try and follow the protocol, but maybe their network connection isn't so great, or they're accidentally crashing for some reason due to misconfiguration or an out of memory or something like this. And then there's Byzantine nodes, which basically have modified the code to run in an arbitrarily evil way. And a lot of consensus algorithms for a long time basically followed the assumption that there's less than 33% of faulty nodes in some way. And so the main trade-off that we made is that we're actually assuming less than 20% of faulty nodes in some way. So this is the main trade-off that we're making for our algorithm, is to basically assume a lower threshold of Byzantine nodes. And I hope you'll see why that trade-off becomes worth it. One more time, just going into some assumptions about the replicas themselves. We basically, in these types of algorithms, we assume that they're all connected to each other and that they can all communicate to each other within delta time. So delta is basically just the time it takes light to go around half the world generally. And you basically bound that. It's basically a bound on the protocol so that OK, well, if it's been long enough, then I time out. Another thing is all the replicas have public-private key pairs, so they can all be identified by their identities and cryptographically signed messages so that everybody knows, OK, it's coming from them. And then, as we said before, we're assuming less than 20% of all nodes are either Byzantine or faulty. OK, so there's a couple things, a couple more concepts to teach you guys before we get into the algorithm itself. The first is the pigeonhole principle. And there's many different ways to use pigeonhole principle, but basically the one I wanted to point out here is if you must vote for A or B and you collect 80% of votes for one of those two things, then you will be guaranteed to see at least 40% of votes for one of the two things. For either A or B, we'll have at least 40% of votes. If you have three different options, then you can kind of extend it a little bit and say you will have at least 40% of votes for A or for not A. So something that is A or something that is not A. Equivocation is just a fancy word for basically saying two different things. So this is what Byzantine nodes can do. They can vote for A and they can vote for B. Now, it's a little bit obvious when they vote for A and vote for B and then tell everybody about that. Generally, what they'll do is they'll tell one person A and tell a different person, I'm voting for B. So just keep that in mind. That's what equivocation means. And then a really important property you'll see is the quorum intersection property in a lot of these consensus papers. So it helps us form a proof by contradiction. So let's say, again, we are voting for either A or B. Let's say A is the orange thing on the left side. And you have more than 40% of votes for that. and B is the green thing on the right side, and you have more than 80% of votes for that green thing. So that can only happen if you have equivocation from more than 20% of the replicas, as you can see in the middle. That's the only way that you can both have 40% of votes for A and 80% of votes for B is by having more than 20% equivocators. But as we said in the beginning, we're assuming that less than 20% of all nodes are Byzantine. So that would basically break our assumption. And so this basically forms a proof by contradiction. I'll say that one more time. So basically, you can't have 40% of one thing and 80% of a conflicting thing unless you're breaking the assumption about how many Byzantine nodes there are. OK, so getting into the algorithm itself now, just some basics is that it's view-based or round-based. There's many different terms for this. So there's one leader per view and one round of voting. And each view will result in a block and or a skip, where a skip is basically no block. So it can actually result in both. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I've said it several times now, but we're assuming less than 20% of all replicas are Byzantine, and also that more than 80% are correct. This makes sure that the safety and liveness properties that I discussed in the beginning of the talk are not violated. OK, so getting in the first part of the algorithm, you either propose or you wait. So in each view, there's a leader. And if you're the leader, you propose. So I say broadcast lead. And called lead is basically some message that you're sending out. By broadcast, I mean you send it to every other replica. So if you're the leader, you broadcast the block to every replica with this message called lead. Basically, I'm the leader, and here's the block for view V. So that's the V and the B. And then everybody else just waits. They wait to receive the proposal. It's set to 2 delta for some reasons. Delta, again, is the maximum time it takes to send a message to someone. For technical reasons, it's 2 delta. But the point is mostly that you start a timer, and you wait to get the proposal from the leader. Then, as everybody else, you either vote or time out. You either receive the valid block or you don't. So once you receive the block from the leader, you broadcast. Again, that means just send to everybody else, all communication. You vote for the block. You say, yes, this is a legitimate block. I won't go into verifying the block, because that will depend on the blockchain itself. But you run whatever logic you need to as your application-specific blockchain needs. And then if it's a valid block, you'll vote for it. Otherwise, if you don't receive a valid block in time, what you'll do is you'll broadcast a vote for no block. So this upside-down T thing is basically, that's a special symbol for null block. So yeah, you can think of that as no block. The block can also point to its parent and all those other good things that blockchains normally have. OK, so how do you actually, once everybody votes, how do you actually progress and finalize? It's pretty simple. Once you see 40% of votes for something, you can actually move to the next view. So you start the whole thing over. Check if you're the leader. Otherwise, you start your timer. And in addition, when you see 40% of votes for something, you also broadcast this cert message. And a cert message is basically just a collection of votes. In the simplest possible system, it's just an array of those 40% of votes that come into you. Maybe you have some sort of signature aggregation, which can do it in a little bit more compact of a way. But essentially, you can just think of it as you're broadcasting that collection of 40% of votes to everyone. And so once you see 40%, you've moved to the next view, and you can start processing the next block. If you're the leader, you can start proposing the next block. If you see 80% of and then I should explain what the asterisk means. The stars basically just means it can be a block or it can be a null. So in the previous slide, we talked about this special timeout, voting for null. The asterisk just means it's either a block or a null. So for either of those, you can, if you see 40 null or you see 40 block, then you can move to the next view, and you broadcast the certificate to everyone, which is a collection of the votes to make sure that everybody has all the necessary information. If you see 80% of votes, and remember, you've already moved on to the next view at this point, because to see 80% for something, you must have seen 40% for it. If you see 80% for it, so this will be in a previous view now, because you've kind of moved past the current view, but you're still waiting for these votes to come in from that old view. If you see 80% come in, then what you can do is you just finalize the block. You know it can't be usurped by anything else. And because it's finalized, all of its ancestors, so its parent and parent's parents, are all finalized implicitly. And then one more thing is that, as I mentioned, you broadcast the certificate of 40% votes when you get 40% of votes. Maybe it's the case that someone sends you this certificate before you get all the votes, and so that's why I added this. You either get 40% of the votes or a certificate which contains 40% of the votes. You will also broadcast a certificate to everybody who hasn't sent it to you. And you just have to do that once. You don't have to do that over and over again. OK, and then that's basically the entire algorithm, honestly. There's one more wrinkle here, which I'll explain, and maybe this is the most complicated part. But basically, yeah, I guess in this slide, I implied that either you're going to vote or you'll time out. It's like, OK, if you see the block, you'll vote the block. Otherwise, you'll vote for null. And if you're an honest replica, you should just do that. There's one more case in which it's OK to vote and then also vote for the block and then later vote null. So that's this case I'm about to talk about. And you don't have to, if you already voted no, if you already timed out, you don't have to worry about this at all. It's just if you cast a vote and you're still stuck in that view, then you might have to also consider voting null. So I call this abort. So if you see 40% of votes for something that is not B, so that's the exclamation B is not B, that is either basically a null vote from somebody or a vote for a block that is not the same block that you voted for, then it's actually OK to then also broadcast a null vote to everybody. So this is basically protecting if you imagine that a malicious leader sends a different block to every replica, then you'll basically get a different vote for a different block for each thing. And there's no 40% quorum on anything. But you will see that other people have not voted for the block that you have voted for. So that's where the not B comes in. And then basically this prevents a leader who equivocates a different block to each participant from stalling the network, because everyone will eventually vote null, and then eventually there'll be a null certificate that you can move on from. OK, so just an overview, basically, of the whole protocol in one slide. I'll just go back through it again. Basically, there's a proposal. Every time you enter a view, if you're the leader, you propose a block. Then, if you see the block in time, you vote for it. Otherwise, you vote for null. There's this abort thing, which is only if you've voted and not timed out. Then you have to worry about this. But it's basically if you ever see 40% of things that conflict with your original vote, then you can also send a null vote. Then every time you see 40% of something, either a block or a null certificate, or either a block or a null, you form a certificate, which is just a collection of those votes. And then you send it to everybody else, all to all. And then lastly, if you ever see 80% of votes come in, so you're already in a future view, but you might see votes come in as you're working on your next view, then you can finalize that block and all prior blocks. And hopefully that happens every block, but there can also be runs where you haven't finalized things and you must finalize them implicitly. So just looking at a quick example here, if you're a visual person, so views progress from left to right, basically. And you have the genesis block, which implicitly has, everybody agrees on the genesis block. And I guess the solid green blocks are the ones that get finalized directly. And the green blocks that are white in the middle are blocks that are finalized implicitly. And then the other boxes are basically certificates that come, but are never finalized in the chain. And then the black stuff on the right is basically stuff that's in your working view. So it hasn't been finalized yet, but it's sort of like the working group of stuff that you're working on. The yellow stuff you can sort of drop from your memory as a validator. And I guess the important thing here is basically what it looks like is you're going to have one nullification certificate or a block certificate in every view. So you have to have at least one box in every view. And you're basically charting this course from left to right of what one of those things is like the valid thing in that view. So it's either a skip, which is like a nullification certificate, or it's a block. And you can finalize things when you know that everybody else, all other replicas, are going to see that thing in that view. So you can think of it like, for finalized blocks, there's a bottleneck there, where that's the only path you can chart through that thing. That's the only path you can chart through that view. That's the only thing that anyone will ever see a certificate for in that view. And so to finalize things, you don't even have to tell people that you're finalizing. You just know, like, I see this in this view, and no one else will see anything else in the view. So I guess going into proofs, in quotes, or kind of argument. So bringing back the ideas I talked about at the beginning of the talk, by the 80-40 quorum intersection property. Basically, if there's 80% votes for something, there can't be 40% for something else. So if you see 80% of votes for a block, then you know no one else can ever see 40% of votes for a different block or for a nullification. So no certificate for anything else. That's why you can finalize it. And then for liveness, basically, you just have to make sure that you can proceed with, well, if you have a correct leader, or an honest leader, they'll correctly distribute the block, and everybody will vote for that block, and you'll be able to finalize it with at least 80% of the vote. For a faulty leader or a Byzantine leader, basically, I'm just illustrating here why you can expect to move on from that view eventually, and maybe nothing will be finalized in that view, but as long as you can move to the next view and something eventually gets finalized, each finalized block implies entire history of finalized blocks. So just based on time, I won't go over those last 2 points. You can ask me about it later, or left as an exercise to the reader. OK, so just to go over kind of what is good about Minimmit. First, it's simple. So there's only these 3 message types, which is, I think, better than what is considered state-of-the-art, basically. In a lot of constructions, the vote, maybe there's 5 message types, because voting for a block is maybe slightly different than voting null, or a certificate for a block is slightly different than a certificate for null. But even that, there's fewer messages than all other constructions that we know about. It's fast, so it can finalize blocks in just a single round of voting, which is the leader dispersing it and everybody voting. So in one round trip, you can finalize blocks. Decide an 80% of the weight. So that is basically tied with state-of-the-art, as far as I know. And then what's, I guess, faster than state-of-the-art is that you can go to the next view after only 40% of all nodes respond to you, which is faster than state-of-the-art. Typically, you'll need like 60% or something like that. So the finalization time is basically state-of-the-art, but the block time is faster. And then lastly, it's really flexible due to its simplicity and its similarity to a lot of other algorithms that already exist. So something like simplex, which has a bunch of different extensions built on top of it, like, oh, you can do simplex with erasure coding, here's how. Like, all those different extensions basically also apply to Minimmit because it's in the same family of algorithms. So you can do all these cool things like signature aggregation, erasure coding, and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's my talk. I'm from Commonware. I said we're the center for kids who can't consensus good, but want to learn to do other stuff good, too. And thanks to everybody that's listed here, Paradigm. And we're coming out with a white paper written by Andrew Lewis Pye soon to basically formalize all the ideas here. And then there's also a Quint spec, thanks to Informal Systems for Quint, and Denise Kologov for writing that Quint spec. Good on questions?
I actually work with Brendan, so but I'm not working on this consensus stuff. So I'm kind of curious. The previous talk, what are the assumptions and I guess properties of Minimmit that are a little different than the monad BFT that we just saw presented?
That's a good question, and I'm not super well versed in the hot stuff line of consensus algorithms. And unfortunately, I had to miss a lot of the talk because I was backstage. But my understanding is basically that it has that fan-out, fan-in property. And while this has the fan-out, it does like a fan-out for the proposal from the leader, and then an all-to-all stage where everybody's doing all-to-all voting. Hot stuff, as I understand, yeah, has that fan-in stage. And there, obviously, Michael talked about there's different ways to kind of get around problems with the centralization, then that can occur when everybody has to push through the same thing.
Just to confirm, as I understand, the message is quadratic, and there is a strong assumption related to the synchronous clock. Am I right? To synchronize the rounds, so it's synchronous consensus algorithm. Am I right?
Yeah, so I guess the first question.
Quadratic, it's.
Sorry, yeah. So it has, I guess, within the whole network, since you're doing all-to-all communication, then there's quadratic complexity in terms of the entire network. From the perspective of one validator, you're sending messages to every other validator, so it's linear from the perspective of one person. And then kind of what I said about, hard to go back in the slides, but, oh, nice. What did I say? Basically, you can do stuff like erasure coding that can do this fan-out kind of thing. So there's a lot of problems with a lot of consensus mechanisms where you push everything through a leader, where they have to tell everybody, OK, here's the block. But what you can do is like an erasure coding kind of thing where you basically tell everybody just a little chunk of the block, and they tell everybody else. And so then the leader never, the amount of bandwidth that the leader has to do, or that any of the peers has to do, is actually constant with respect to the size of the block rather than to the size of the validator set. So you can do those kinds of things. That's not built into the original protocol, but it's nice that it's easily extensible in that way. That's already been applied to other similar consensus functions. And then you had another question, sorry, that I forgot. Synchronous timeout, yeah. So you do basically, as I was saying, you have to make this assumption about the delta timeout thing. What's nice is that you don't have to sync your clocks, really, because you can't progress to the next view until you've seen a sufficient number of messages. So you don't just say, OK, timeout, I'm moving to the next view. Timeout, I'm moving to the next view if you're not synced up. Basically, you time out, and then only once you see everybody else's timeout, then you move to the next view. And so you do have to get that parameter right. That's like that delta. That's the maximum amount of time you're willing to wait. But after that, it's like if somebody's clock happens to be, yeah, you need clocks to run at around the same speed, but if someone's clock is 10 seconds off someone else's clock, that part actually doesn't matter. Great, thanks.
Nice job.